white people than some of my other friends or coworkers. And that took me a long time, like pretty much up until now. Not right now, but in recent years. It took me time to even educate myself on the nuances and how I could be more vocal and help with education. Because, yeah, sure, we all want to be treated equally, and we should definitely respect that. I don't ever believe anyone's hiring me because I'm Black, but I understand that that is a thing. So now that I can see it and understand it, you can even pick up on that in the interview process. So I just want to include people who may be a little naive, but eventually you'll get there because you have to get there. There isn't as soon as it happened, you're like, girl, it just happened. Okay, now I'm ready, and now I can deal with it. And then another point you mentioned, unconscious bias, and I just wanted to clarify this. Just because you did a training for 2 hours, the word unconscious is in the phrase. So unconscious naturally means that you're not conscious, and so that's working with your subconscious, in which case you have to unlearn that. So you're not going to unlearn that in 2 hours. And I just would expect that these people would know this because they have such fancy degrees and they're so much better than the rest of us, and they don't understand the definition of unconscious, subconscious, and why you're not conscious. I'm just like, you're not even trying at that point. And then it's like, I have to educate you on this, but I'm the lesser person. I'm the one that's a struggle city, and you don't know if you can hire us.
Well, do you feel like I don't know, I guess this question can go to any of us, but I don't know, I find myself in situations as well where I always feel like I'm that person. I always have to be the one educated. It's like, it's not my job necessarily. It makes my job harder.
Yeah.
And it's just but then you're stuck between hey, well, if I don't tell the person, then they will never know. But it's like, damn, they can get a pass for not knowing all the time. People can get
That's why I take that on. I personally take that on, and I have a limit. I'm going to give you that one step. If you keep pushing me, we're going to have issues, and now I'm going to escalate this. And if HR doesn't get it together, then you just lost a perfectly good employee, and I wish you luck. Because every role that I'm in, shit crumbles when I leave. Because I make my mark. So I'm just
I hear that.
If you make yourself invaluable and people don't respect you, then they're losing you as a candidate, and they just lost out because they didn't take the time to listen to you, or they're too worried about the feelings of other employees who contribute nothing to the company. So I take that on. I don't see it as I'm tired. It's if I have to keep educating you. And honestly, it's not like every day someone is testing me, right? I'm more tired when I'm out in the streets and I'm reading the news. Some companies is like that. Now in my life, I very rarely get tested, even though I was tested twice in 2 days. But I'm just saying, that didn't happen for 6 months.
on the street.
People were trying me. But you got a limit. You just stop and you're just I actually have to write to someone I'm not going to educate you on the nuance of race in America right now. I need you to just focus on the feedback and watch how you say things. I will just end it there because I don't have the time or the you're wasting my time and the company's time by me having to educate you on this. This is a waste of my time. You don't deserve it.
Sorry, I just wanted to, what's the alternative if you don't educate?
Well, I feel like you're part of the problem then at that point because you're not doing anything to stop the problem. I don't know. That's the flip side of that shit, But it's exhausting, and it's just you got your own mental space that you're dealing with being a minority in the workspace. So it's you're taking that on, but then also you got to take somebody else's shit on. This is a job. It's 3 jobs at once almost going on. Your real job, your mental shit is going on, and then educating people. My experience, at least. And, some days you need a day off of it, but it's a constant thing that seems to never stop when shit comes up. And it's you gotta. For me, it makes me have to walk around a lot of times just walk around a lot of times, just ready. You gotta stay on point and ready, and stay ready. It's damn, I want to sleep. I want to be able to sleep with both eyes open, closed instead of having one eye open. And that's what it feels like. It's that pressure, at least my opinion, my experiences. So shit.
Yeah, no, I think that that's all valid points. You do get tired. But I think it's not solely, it shouldn't solely be on your shoulders either. It should be part of that process of education with your employer. So when you have that support, right, and you feel like it's overly burdensome because maybe it's an individual, maybe it's a few, when you go to whomever in, HR, they should have your back and be able to support, whether it's, employee mediation or whatever, a discussion. But if you're going somewhere where that employer doesn't have that support for you and it's not genuine or authentic for inclusion, yeah, you're gonna feel tired. And those are the types of environments where it's like, deuces, I don't wanna be there, because it's not coming from a place of authenticity. So of course you're gonna get burned out with everything else you're doing, especially in the tech space.
Are there ways, I guess, to tell before you even get that far into the company, like just outside looking in, to tell if a company is genuine and authentic in their, diversity and inclusion and stuff? For example, for me, one thing that kind of irks me, and I don't know, it's crazy because I see these big companies, and a lot of these companies, they have their diversity and inclusion person. And usually, and that person is in charge of also finding diverse candidates and talent and all that stuff like that. And I kind of often see where they have a person that's not of color there. I feel some way about that, because it's like, how is that person going to know those channels to go and reach? They don't know shit. Most of them don't know. I mean, straight up how I feel. How often do they know about HBCUs or just the channels that go through to actually find these diverse candidates? So it's so easy to say, hey, we can't find diverse candidates at that point. And it's like, I don't feel like that was a genuine try when I see that. Put the person that, is the representation of the people that you're trying to, the demographic you're trying to serve in that position, that role. They will probably have, their friends are of that demographic, their friends over that, their family members. There's just so many channels and connections in that space where they can actually find that. I don't know, when you talk about authenticity, I can't say the word, I don't know, I feel like that's a missed mark in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely a missed mark. I would also add to that, though, if you want ways to see before you actually take the job, what did you see when you went in the office?
Well,
what was reflected?
Everybody had their best face on.
They have their face on, but you can see diversity depending on how you're defining that. So, pay attention to that. And I wouldn't make an assumption, that's the other thing, just because you're Caucasian, that you don't have those connections, because maybe you come from a place where you were able to make those connections because of feedback, etc. I think it's hard to base something solely on what you see. That's just a starting point, but you do have to begin to strategically ask questions to get a feel. But I always go back to, sometimes it's, yes, you're taking a risk, but it's time and instinct, and it will show itself whether or not it's true.
I kind of agree with where you're coming from, and regardless of who's in the position, to me, it from an outsider looking in, it looks like ethics washing. Like, we have this problem, this person's in charge of it. When someone knows that there's an issue with it, go to this person, regardless of how well that person is doing. And if a company is large enough, my perspective is always, if it's important, they'll just figure out a way to get it done. Companies will pivot because their business isn't working. So if it's important to hire diverse people, they'll hire diverse people. And that's where, from my perspective, it always kind of trickles down from the top. I'm kind of curious, just from the people in the room, are the kind of shared experiences up here resonating, or do you experience something different? I mean, I know for me personally, because I've been at smaller organizations, I'm always kind of commenting from what I think happened. So, I don't have a lot of firsthand experience on what you guys are talking about. I'm just curious, would you say this is universal?
I don't hear anyone.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Bad? Okay.
So I personally have broken up the diversity in February, like it's awesome, because I realized diversity is diversion. and it doesn't, if you even look at the word, it doesn't mean come together.
Yeah.
And the whole inclusion thing, all of diversity to me was a great try, but there's no return on the investment, right? And so in general, I feel like exclusion might be the way, because since we're spending all the money, right? Black millennials are spending $13.5 billion every month. And since we're making it cool, we're living our best lives, and everybody's using our phrases and things, how is that we're getting the least of everything? We got 1% last year of the $9 billion that's raised just in New York City. So for me, diversity is just done, it's dead, and I think that we should be seeking only equality. That's it. That should be the only phrase that should matter to us, because being included doesn't matter. Equality should be all that matters.
I think there's some truth to what you're saying, and we were talking earlier, and we were saying that it kind of goes back to what Tyler Perry said at the BET Awards, and it's not really about, like, we've been trying to get a seat at the table for so long that maybe it's time that more Black people started creating their own tables and stopped relying on these companies to be diverse. And I've heard people say that before, and I've heard people say, you know, is Papa John's gonna change? Is Sephora really gonna change? Are these companies that are consistently making mistakes going to actually change? Why are we giving them second chances? Why don't we create our own Starbucks? Why don't we create our own Papa John's? You know, because then we don't, I mean, theoretically, we wouldn't have these issues, a lot of the issues that many of us experience in the workplace is like, because we're creating our own. So I think that I sort of grapple with that, because I totally agree with creating our own, but on the other hand, I'm like, so then what happens to the Black people or the people of color who are in these companies where we are the minority? What do we do when if I want to work at Apple, I want to continue working at Apple or Google or wherever? It's just like, it's tough, because you know and at the end of the day, you're going to be one of the only or one of the few, but there's not enough of the Googles. There's no Black-owned, as far as I know, there's no Black-owned smartphones. So there's like, it's like, yeah, I want to move and get a different phone, but it's like, there's not enough of that going around. So it's like coming up with strategies for how we can navigate these workplaces where we are usually the only ones. It feels like that's the solution for right now, but I think in the long term, creating our own is what's really gonna, I guess, set us free.
But there is a Black mobile company.
It's a smartphone?
Yeah, it's a smartphone. So there's,
You guys are pretty
and
mad.
there's a lack of everything, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is letting us know where they are, or the marketing dollars, and I think that's just where we're gonna have to figure out a better way to use social media.
The exposure, yeah.
On keeping with that, that thought that you just mentioned, so Brian kind of had a question connected to that. Right now, like on Twitter, like our culture, like, oh, you're canceled, this is canceled. Why aren't we like canceling companies that like don't, you know, have our best interest in mind? And I think I saw something the other day too with, is it Young Jeezy that had a smartphone? Like someone else developed a smartphone.
I don't know, he does a lot.
But yeah, like, can we
Angel
cancel?
investor.
How do we go about like canceling companies?
Oh, Twitter. Twitter will stress you out. So what I'm going to say may be controversial, but whatever. I think maybe we're putting too much stock in getting approval from people who don't deserve it.
Yes.
I'm not trying to go back 400 years, but I don't know if you guys have heard of Hegel. Just gonna drop some philosophies. I swear to study, and I'm a nerd. So Hegel, he had this idea of the master-slave dialectic, right? Which obviously is a blueprint for slavery, and the ethos of it is essentially you have a master, and then there's a person that works for them. And the connection is very strong in the fact that they cannot survive without each other. So the master has no life unless they have someone to oversee or control, and the slave also has no life without the acceptance of the master. This is also similar to panopticon, which is the structure of prison today. But even when you try to disassociate yourself, so if the slave in this particular example is trying to disassociate, you may be able to do that for a little bit, but Hegel says that you always come back because it's that approval from the master that keeps the connection going. And to unlearn that, he would claim is not a thing. I would say it just takes a lot of time. But where I'm getting at is we need to stop worrying so much about what the master is going to do and just accept that homie's not going to get it. We can build our own, we can start our own businesses. They will not have the same support as master's businesses, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. That doesn't mean that we can't do that or that they're less than. So I'm not really a part of cancel culture because I'm like, you trying to cancel it is giving it more life. Like, just stop caring about what these fools are doing. Like, go buy Fenty, do something else. Like, I don't care that Kylie's skincare is shady. Who cares about Kylie? But you're commenting on Twitter and it's this whole thing and you're feeding the beast. So just like stop feeding the master, start to separate and say fuck Hegel, because you're not gonna go back to the dudes disrespecting you and you're not gonna keep falling into the trap, because that's how they make money off of you. That's how they appropriate our culture. That's how they steal our identity, because we keep feeding the beast and we keep giving them reasons to continue to poke at us. I believe just beauty, I don't know, it's tied to women or whatever. I believe a lot of the beauty companies are fucking up on purpose because they're getting, or they don't care about the fuck up because they're getting so much attention right now because of Twitter. So it's like, they know damn well sitting out this package is real shady, but it's like, we had to get it out and there'll be some press and then we'll do a new launch. Like, people are definitely thinking this way up in their brains. Like, this is happening, and so a lot of it is just us feeding it. And I think that's separate from education. I think that's really separate.
Yeah, couldn't have said that any better. I think it's difficult for us to disassociate ourselves. And I mean, a good example of that is what happened with Gucci and Prada. And I don't personally wear those, so it was easy for me to be like, oh, boycott Gucci. But I just was like trying to figure out why it was so difficult for some of these celebrities, these black celebrities, to disassociate themselves from these brands that have literally like spit in our faces. And it definitely goes back to that, is that we are seeking the approval, and these things make us feel like a sense of value. And not to go back to, I loved Kanye West, but to go back to a Kanye West line is like that idea that, you know, having these things is gonna make us feel better, but at the end of the day, we're still like, it doesn't matter. Society's still gonna see us as a, you know, as a N-word in a coupe or whatever. So it's like, we are buying these things and to gain that approval, and it's a matter of unlearning, and it's difficult. It takes time to, you know, I don't want to part from some of these things that I use in some of these brands, and it's really, really, really difficult. But companies count on the fact that we forget, and we're kind of just, they know that, you know, Uber knows that the boycott was going to happen, but then people were going to re-download the Uber apps and things were going to go back to normal. And it's like, this will blow over with Sephora and with Papa John's and with all of these companies, Starbucks. People boycott for 2 weeks and then they go back. And companies recognize that. So they're like, let them do their little hashtags on Twitter and on Instagram, but they'll be back and we'll relaunch. Like you said, we'll come out with a new launch or with the, you know, so it's a matter of unlearning. How do we do that is, I guess, the more challenging question. And it's a matter of going back to what you said. It's, if there's an alternative out there, it's easier to switch to this or that if we have alternatives, or if there's exposure to those alternatives. 'Cause they're all out there. We don't know that all of these things exist. I didn't know until you guys said it that there's a black-owned smartphone. You know, these are things that are not, it's a matter of exposure. So I guess that goes back to you being a social media person. How do we get that stuff out there?
Yeah, I've never canceled anything on Twitter. Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that it's easy to talk about that as like the collective does something, but like for me personally, I've never canceled anything or like responded to anyone on Twitter. I'm sure I'm not the only one, and I feel like part of the reason why it's so sensationalized is because it's so easy to kind of group people and associate people, whether those associations are true or not. And like the power of the narrative is also a humongous problem, in my opinion. Kind of saying a lot with not saying a lot, but yeah.
So sorry, just out of curiosity. So I mean, what drives you to? Because for me personally, as a Black person, if I learned that a CEO said the N-word or said something that was offensive or had a Black person in chains or a boy with Black boy with a monkey shirt, I don't like, my conscience will not let me purchase that. So I'm interested in finding out like what runs through your mind or how you're able to disassociate the things that these companies do or the things that these owners say. How are you comfortable putting money into their pockets when they're basically spitting in your face as a Black person?
I think it's probably ignorance, because I just don't try to involve myself in that, and maybe it's like the luxury of not having to worry about it, but there's so many other things to worry about, in my opinion. And when I can make the choice, then if the choice is obvious, I would absolutely make that choice. We're talking about smartphones. Like realistically, look, I use an iPhone. I'm sure, I don't know, whoever's phone is great, but that wouldn't be enough for me just to say I'm going to use this person's phone because they're Black. If it was better, I absolutely would. But I think like these conversations are a little more nuanced and more individualized, and I guess my point was it's kind of easy to lump yourself in the narrative when it's like convenient, like you mentioned, like if it's really easy to toss something away, then yeah, absolutely. But if your entire world is involved in it or your business is involved in it, it's probably not as straightforward. Yeah.
No, I kind of can understand some of what you're saying too, because I think at the end of the day, I think we seek products and just various things that makes our lives easier. So it's like, yeah, I could not use an iPhone, but it'd make my whole world go upside down. I mean, me personally though. So it's like,
Yeah, just one quick thing. Sorry. So both my parents are from Ghana, and like whenever I get the chance to support anything Ghanaian, I'm biased towards that, because I want to be biased towards that, whether and maybe to a fault, but I think it's more of an individual choice than I think we as a collective should cancel this thing because some CEO said the N-word in a marketing meeting, like thinking about Netflix, for example, to make some good shows, so it's hard to cancel it.
Yeah, going back to Brian, what you said, I think what's really unfortunate is that people often associate Black businesses with lower quality. So I think that just because it's not an iPhone and it's a Black-owned smartphone doesn't mean that the quality is less than. So I think that that's what really holds a lot of Black consumers back from supporting Black products, is this idea that just because it's not the master's product, essentially it's lesser than, and we have to get out of that mindset.
I think that's true of some things, but earlier we were talking about shade moisture, and like for me personally, I like it better. At least you guys are educating me that maybe it's not as pro-Black as I thought it was, but I liked it because it was that. And
It still is.
And I like shea butter because I think it moisturizes better.
That's not the same thing, but okay.
I know, but yeah.
But would you support a shea butter-esque product that was from a non-problematic business if you had an alternative? Or is it just that I like this product and I'm not really willing to switch because I like this product because it's convenient to not switch?
I absolutely would switch. My wife is a big advocate for animal rights, so she's all about using cruelty-free products. Prior to us being married, it's something I never thought about. She made me more aware of it. So again, because there are alternatives, then I would choose that alternative. So yeah, I would.
I was gonna say, I'm hearing a couple things here, but it sounds like for you though, and I think this is all about just perspective and how you view offenses, right? Some people just literally may not be offended by some of the blatant racism that that's out there because they can say or attribute it to the owner of that. Like, that's not a reflection on me because you did that. But I totally get wanting to not support, obviously these companies where you're putting your dollars and they would even do something so egregious. I get that. It just sounds like you're not seeking it out to figure out who's doing what.
Right.
Or doing the research to confirm whether or not that was actually accurate.
I also think it just hasn't hit you yet. I think we all have like a very specific moment where whoa, this is rough, this isn't cool. There have been many things that have happened. I've always hated Kanye. I don't care.
Always,
even
I appreciate him as an artist back in the day, but I just watched him. After Mama passed, I knew his stuff was going down and I could feel it in his soul. And all the more reason for me not to mess with Kanye. I think everyone has a moment where they're like, no, I'm not doing it. I'm glad you brought up animal rights because it's very important, protect the environment. But that's like something that resonates with you. If you have that one thing that really speaks to you, it's easy for you to support it. And I'm just going to bring it back to the conditioning and Hegel again, but you're going to disconnect and then you're going to do the same thing over again. And the key is to continue. Once you learn something, it's very hard to unlearn it if you're consciously learning something. And I think there's a lot of power in that. So even if you buy a product that was tested on bunnies and you shouldn't have, or you listened to Kanye yesterday, even though he was with Trump the day before. Whatever.
These are free, y'all. So
Well, then I support the free.
now we have a different conversation.
I'm
Now
gonna
we
go
have
about
a
this
different
now.
conversation.
But even if that happens, that doesn't mean that your black card's revoked or you're not for the people or you're not conscious. It's just you just have to keep reiterating what is important to you. And I had another point, but I don't remember anymore. Oh, I remember now. We're talking about conditioning. Well, I want to talk about conditioning. All of these examples, yes, it's very individualized. Also, to be a black person isn't just one type of black person, right? There's different cultures and there's a lot of us. But we were also conditioned to think this way. So this is why I challenge everyone to really dig deep and maybe do some reading. But we were conditioned to feel less than, and that's probably a good reason why. But we're also conditioned to disagree with each other and not like each other. So it's easier for us to be skeptical of our own products because we were conditioned to believe that. And we were conditioned to think that other things are superior. So I don't know, I just want you guys to keep that in mind because it's not really you should do this and you shouldn't do that. We were all conditioned a similar way. It's just some of us get it and some of us don't. And sometimes it just takes time to appear.
I would just say though, as someone who I support organic products, and a lot of those companies happen to be black owned. But if you don't have quality stuff, I don't care what you are. I'm not supporting it. So I think that's a piece of it. Yes, maybe some conditioning, but it's also just because you are black does not mean I'm going to support that. I think you need to raise your, the expectation and the standards of your product as well.
So are you guys saying that if it was a white face selling it, it would be okay?
No.
And then sometimes people with African Black plus radio and Black plus Africa. And so we find sometimes that Africans don't identify with Black Americans.
Yeah.
So sometimes that might be why they don't get so offended. Because in some cases they kind of feel the same way about the Black American.
That's
Right.
another.
And it's that's a whole other, that's like a deeper, because the mother whose son was wearing the monkey sweater was African.
Right.
I don't remember which country she was
They were
from.
European. Well, they've been.
Yeah, they were like, yeah, but they were like African Europe, exactly. So she didn't see anything offensive with her son wearing, her black son wearing a sweater with a monkey on it. So yeah, there's different, and I guess it just, yeah, there's different, the fact that you, yeah. But just to kind of counter that, my parents are from Cameroon, so I identify as African and black, but people who know me, I guess, call me like super pro-black. And I don't agree with your stance, even though, and nothing is wrong with that. I don't agree with that stance, and I guess maybe I'm more Americanized, but I do agree in the sense that sometimes people try not to identify themselves as black who are African. Yeah, I'm sorry. So the stance as far as like if an owner of a company does something or says something that is offensive to black people, I'm not supporting that because I feel like that's my dollars and our dollars should be used and poured back into the black community. So, I mean, going back to what you said though, but it's a longer conversation.
Yeah.
I think it's...
Just to be clear, I also agree with that. It's just like I don't proactively seek that out, right? Like someone were to come to me and say, hey, don't wear New Balances because they, I don't know, lynch people on the weekends, I probably would stop wearing New Balances.
Oh yeah,
So I also think there's like a scale, right? And actually, just bringing it back to the tech conversation, like you can only like worry about so many things. So like if you're at work, like your job is to, if you're a developer, I don't know, put out some feature or hit some metric. Now on top of that job, you have to, I don't know, educate the person that you're working with that whatever idiotic thing that they're saying is completely insensitive. That's a second job. And then on top of, it's like at a certain point, you have to just, at least this is my kind of approach. You got to figure out what's important to me. How much time do I have? Like, does this concern me? Can I help other people? And leave it at that. And I think to someone else's point, when it becomes a pattern, and this is maybe why attrition is such a problem, that's why people just bounce, because like there's only so much of that you can deal with.
You want to say something?
No, well, the end.
No, yeah, we kind of been going on for a while now, and I think we're going to end with Yao and his comments and stuff. So hopefully you all got to take away some stuff from this conversation. Again, we try to go into like some intricate things and just kind of talk about, what diversity means to us and other people and just the whole scheme of it. I don't know, I guess I will go back around to all the panelists and let them end on a note of, kind of that thing that you all want to leave, last thing to leave with, Jerry Springer's final thought type thing. So yeah. So.
Come back.
Well, if you don't have that, you don't have that.
Yeah, I just think it's important that we, what you said that was really important is that we are conditioned to disagree with each other and, use that as a reason to hate this person and that person. But I think it's really important to understand that we're kind of all in this together. And coming to events like this and just networking with other people who have gone through or are going through similar experiences is really important. So if you are going through a really crazy experience in your workplace, just try to keep connecting with